today we're going to talk about the two different vantage points through which we experience life. Now, the first one we're all familiar with, which is the experiences we all perceive through our material mind. Think of the material being, the material mind, as being like a spinning globe in space. You've all seen these beautiful images from outer space of a beautiful blue earth spinning round and round. Think of your material mind as that globe, that spinning globe. Now, all our illusions, our realities, everything about our lives, material lives, are contained within this spinning globe. Whatever we see, we feel, we experience is totally contained within the borders of this spinning globe. Now, from the time we awake to the time we go to sleep, our reality is filled with different activities and events and experiences. For example, we go to work, we meet people, we socialize, we experience varying emotions, we travel, we play sports, we watch the news, and we entertain ourselves in so many different ways. All these different events and experiences make up what I call the reality of our material mind. And our material world is governed by time and change, and rapidly flowing events that create a reality of high activity and chaos. So in a nutshell, our material reality is one of chaos, stress, and a constant run or a constant race between events, people, and places. And I don't need to expand further on this, as we are all very familiar with the happenings of the material world. So let's call this our material reality. And we've all been blessed with this material reality, so we are all enjoying it and we are all experiencing it. And it's great because it plays a very important role where we gain knowledge from our lives. Now, in parallel with our material reality, we also have the inverted commas self. We have the self, or our spiritual being, which makes up the second half of our reality. A reality very few of us actually recognize unless we care to look. You can think of the self as the vast space or the whole universe in which this tiny blue globe is spinning, is existing. So the self is that vast infinite universe in which this tiny globe is spinning, which is our material mind. Now, what does the self see as we experience events in our material lives? That is the question we're going to explore today for the next few minutes. So what is the reality of the self? Let us use the term self-reality so that we can differentiate from the material reality. So today we're going to talk of material reality and self-reality, and we're going to explore both, how they view the same events. Number one, the self is not governed by time or change. The self is completely still and silent. Next, the self is a witness to all our material thoughts, actions, and experiences. The self enjoys the complete vision of every action or event. The self does not partake in any of our actions, be they good, bad, or indifferent. Our material mind partakes, but the self does not. The self is independent. In the Bhagavad Gita, Sri Krishna explains the role of the self beautifully, and I'll paraphrase it here so that we can kind of draw the essence based on our topic today. And it says that the Lord, or the self, determines neither the doership nor the doings of beings. So what beings do and how they do it is unaffected by the self. He says, nor even the union with the fruit of their actions. So whatever we do in our material world, our successes, our failures, completely unconnected with the self. The self does not partake in virtue or sin of anyone. So if at a material level we do things that are not right, that are bad, that hurt others, The self is completely unaffected by that, totally. Then he says the wise self looks with the same eye on a humble learned sage, a cow, an elephant, a dog, and even a pariah. So the self views everything with the same eye, with zero bias. So, my dear friends, this is beautifully portrayed in the Gita, that the self is a totally non-engaged, independent observer of everything. So each one of us has the self, which is an independent observer, and the material mind, which is chaotic, which we all experience. So in essence, the self observes the full picture and takes in the knowledge that is born from our experiences in the material world. You all remember the saying, the origin is light, light brings life, life brings experience, experience brings knowledge, and knowledge is light. And so the origin being our creator, we come from the light, which is our life force, which is the self. Light brings life, which gives us the ability to perform, live, experience in the material world. So life brings experience. And when we reflect on our experiences and we learn from our experiences, they become knowledge. And knowledge is light, and that's the full circle. And I've shared with you the example of how we start life as the ray of a sun. And the ray of the sun is not as bright as its source. But as it grows in knowledge, it becomes so bright that at some point you can't tell it apart from its source. So we are looking at the cycle of life. Now, the self in this context witnesses everything from a totally independent vantage point, and it draws light from what our material mind experiences and processes. So the only thing the self does is draws the light of knowledge, but otherwise it's independent. The self embodies our life force, the life energy that makes us alive. Therefore, it is very powerful and it has infinite intelligence. And we are all blessed with these two very beautiful faculties. The material reality based on action, through which we gain knowledge, and the self-reality, which is silent, still, and sees all without any participation in the material reality. The self is inaction, and the material is action. Both exist together. When you look through the self, you enter the space of stillness and inaction, from there the material reality opens itself, and you see the full picture. The spinning globe splits open in two halves, both halves facing the entire universe, and that makes the reality of the material mind, the material world, totally evident in the self-reality. They become merged. So now let us look at some examples of situations in the material world and explore the perception of the material mind versus what the self sees and witnesses. It's very interesting. So Karima and I were recently in Kenya, very recently, and we went for breakfast in our hotel dining room in the morning. It was about 8:30-ish. And the staff was warm and welcoming, and they all wore masks for their safety as well as ours. And the guests were requested to keep their masks on, except when eating, which is fair. Then behind us, we heard a gruff, angry voice of a tall, almost 7-foot tall Kenyan man who was on his mobile phone screaming at someone at the other end of the line. He was huge, physically huge, rude, and behaved like a brute. And first thing in the morning, you're not used to seeing this. Next, he walked past us and cut through the buffet line and took the front position. "Where is the food?" he demanded angrily from the chefs who were behind the counter, who appeared terrified by him. "Where is the food?" he kept demanding. Unfortunately, at that moment, a young female server walked up to him and requested him to put on his mask. Very bad idea. He exploded and screamed, "I don't wear masks." The poor girl ran away in fear. We quietly watched this whole scene unfold. An angry bully and a very fearful staff. That was the situation. And a restaurant full of people who were disturbed by this outburst. Once we got our food, we sat at our table, and behind us the grunting and shouting continued. Karima looked at me and shook her head and said, "He is a primate." A good description for an angry gorilla, I thought. Actually, I laughed. Yeah, primate, sure. And for those of you who don't know Karima well, she is one of the most polite people in the world you will come across. And even she was fed up with this guy. But in her own classy way, she didn't use a four-letter word like most of us would. She just called him a primate. And that told me she had had enough. So anyway, here we were, Karima and I, in a stress-filled situation fueled by one angry primate. You can all visualize this situation as you have all come across something like this in one shape or form or another in your lives. At this point, our perception of the situation was 100% based on our material mind, the spinning globe in endless space. So what did the self see in all this? What did the space see as to what was going on in the spinning globe? As I said earlier, the self is the vast infinite universe that houses the little spinning globe. But at a conscious level, I see the self as a reality that is present in parallel with the material reality. So to me, the material reality and self-reality are like two lanes of a highway, both going in the same direction, side by side. You can visualize that, right? So at this point, I decided to switch lanes from the material reality to the self-reality, step into the self, and see how it observed this whole situation. And I'm happy to share with you in a few moments a technique of how we can switch from the material lane to the self-reality. And we have to practice it, but it's very possible. Now, what did the self see in this situation? The self would say, "I was present. I witnessed everything. I observed every moment and every event in minutiae, without being involved in any way with any of the happenings. I even witnessed the things you missed that caused you all this stress. I experienced the conflictive thoughts that crossed your mind in the midst of this chaos, for I was present as a still, silent observer." So what did the self observe here? The so-called primate had just had one of the roughest nights of his life. He was responsible for receiving a group of very important dignitaries from Saudi Arabia at the airport at 2 a.m. And they had come to visit the company that he worked for. His boss had received a red carpet welcome when he visited Saudi Arabia. And this was his opportunity to reciprocate. So he entrusted our friend the primate with this task, to receive this delegation at 2 in the morning. Unfortunately, everything went very wrong at the airport at 2 a.m. The planned red carpet welcome did not materialize as planned as a result of a series of mishaps. Even the luggage of the Saudi guests ended up being misplaced and sent to the wrong destination. Everything that could go wrong went wrong for this poor guy. And he tried desperately to correct all these catastrophes until 8 a.m. His guests were absolutely livid, as was his boss. This man was about to lose his job. So the poor guy was glued to the phone as he entered the restaurant, trying to fix the string of mishaps. He was starving as he had missed dinner the previous night. He was hungry. This is why he blew a fuse when the food in the buffet had not been replenished. Then came the bombshell with the young lady asking him to wear his mask. That was the last thing he needed to hear, as it triggered an old scar in him, and we all witnessed the eruption. It was ugly. What was this scar? This young man had been to the US on a course, and this was during COVID, and he refused to get vaccinated or wear a mask because he believed in the conspiracy theory that the whole pandemic was engineered by big pharma and governments, and that he was not going to acquiesce to this conspiracy. Needless to say, he got into a lot of trouble and even spent a night in jail over this one. So here, in one of the most trying moments, he's asked by this innocent young lady to wear a mask, hence the explosion. There was so much more to this situation that connected the food delay to the delayed deliveries of supplies, etc., which no one saw. But the moment just created itself perfectly. The innocent young lady who took the brunt of his ire had just returned from training, where she was taught to be assertive about health and safety of the hotel guests and staff. So she was right. She was following what she was taught. Hence, she dared to face up to the primate and then ran for the hills shivering. It was almost comical the way everything came together. I thought, what a different reality that was compared to the one Karima and I saw at a material level. Knowing the self-reality, I actually felt sympathy for this man. We saw him the next day, and he was calm and polite. Interestingly, we also saw him at the airport as we were leaving Kenya. He seemed to appear in our space repeatedly, revealing a very different demeanor to the one we saw on day one. After seeing what the self saw, I actually prayed for peace and healing for this man, and for all those who took the brunt of his anger. So, my dear friends, the self simply witnessed all this unfold, unaffected by anything or any of the events. Now let me share with you another profound dimension of the self-reality that I witnessed several months back. I was watching a very troubling video I received on the Russia-Ukraine war. I watched a young Ukrainian lady in her mid-40s running away from Russian bullets that were coming at her from everywhere. I was terrified for her. I mean, I'd received this video as a forward. It was horrific. Her face was filled with fear and horror. She frantically ran for her life, desperately trying not to get hit. But then a bullet struck her, and she fell to the ground. While all this was happening, I had switched to the lane of the self-reality and witnessed a very striking set of events transpire in the same situation. At the moment when the bullet hit her in the back of her neck, something very awe-inspiring happened. I witnessed, just as she was falling, she hadn't even reached the ground, I witnessed her radiant self let go of her body and flow into a vast oneness. It was an absolutely spectacular scene. While her material reality was filled with fear and terror, her self-reality was free, peaceful, radiant, and completely unaffected by what was happening. When I saw this, I actually felt happy for her. While the worst things were happening in her material world, her self remained vibrant, happy, peaceful, radiant, and completely free. Her self simply merged into the oneness. She was like freed. And I was happy for her. So my dear friends, the self-reality is truly an aspect of ourselves that we must seek to engage with and experience, because it takes us well beyond our material reality. It gives us the full picture of every event and circumstance and helps us derive enlightened knowledge from our experiences. The self-reality helps place our material problems and challenges in a healthy and positive perspective because we see the full picture, governing our reactions to our challenges with confidence and absence of fear. It helps us see our life from an elevated level, like one who views the world from a plane from 35,000 feet above, when a house appears like a little dot of light. And yet, in this little dot may be people experiencing their entire material realities of power, ego, pride, fear, worry, happiness, and lots more. So now let's take a few moments and learn a meditative technique that we can practice at the end of each day before we go to bed. This technique is best practiced when we go into reflective mode, when we recall and reflect on the events and experiences of the day, so we can learn and derive knowledge from them. So this technique includes 4 simple steps. In step 1, and this is how we learn to shift from the material reality to the self-reality. As you practice this technique, you'll be able to more and more begin to realize the self-reality. It won't all come on day 1, but it'll definitely grow if you practice it with discipline. So in step 1, we engage fully with nature, because nature reveals to us oneness with all creation. And remember, we have to be in the oneness to engage with the self, so that we are able to see the full reality of everything. Next, in step 2, we empty the mind of all our thoughts. We let every single thought go away. We go to zero thought, an empty, clean mind. Remember, this is just before you're going to bed. In step 3, we go completely still and silent, which places us at the level of the self. And in step 4, we anchor ourselves in the self using anchor thought. Now, you've all practiced anchor thought, and for those of you who are participating here for the first time, anchor thought is a very powerful concept, because if I were to ask you, how are you? And you say, I am fine, that's the most useless thing you could ever say to me. But if I were to ask you, how are you? And you related to me what you are anchored in, what your self is anchored in, what your state of being is, you will say, I am happy, I am grateful, I am clear, you're full of clarity. So many, you're defining your state of being, and then you anchor yourself, or I am oneness, you anchor yourself in that state of being, and with that you create the space and the energy around you which everybody else experiences. And what it does is it places your mind at a much higher level, where you are able to see things with clarity, you're able to experience life the way you best need to. So anchor thought is what we will practice at the 4th step, where we anchor ourselves into the self. And then from there, we can go to sleep, but be sure that the self will start showing you new dimensions of the very things you saw but missed in your material reality. And over time and with more practice, you'll actually be able to switch from the material reality to the self-reality. Very almost like second nature, but it's going to take some practice. So if you're ready, we can do a quick practice of this technique. So let's sit back, take a moment, close your eyes, and breathe freely. Be at complete peace and breathe freely. Be completely relaxed. Let go of all your tensions and all your worries and everything, and be at total peace. And I'd like you to imagine that you're standing on top of a tall mountain, surrounded by snow-capped peaks of other mountains. The grass is green, the sky is blue, the morning sun is shining on the sparkling dewdrops. There's birds in the air, there's flowers in the fields. In front of you is a beautiful crystal clear lake. You are in the midst of the most beautiful nature, vibrant nature, beautiful nature. Take a moment and connect with nature. Connect with this beautiful scene. Become one with it. Everything is absolutely beautiful. The lake in front of you is pristine, sparkling in the morning sun. And you decide to walk towards the lake. And as you reach next to the lake, on your right-hand side, you see a tree stump, which is about the height of your waist. And on the tree stump is a golden cage. And in the golden cage is lots and lots of beautiful, colorful little birds flying around, making noise, chirping away, full of life, full of chaos, full of noise. The little birds, the colorful little birds are your thoughts. The cage is your mind. And now you wish to let go of all your thoughts. So you open the cage door and let these beautiful little birds fly away, chirping noisily as they disappear into the horizon. As you repeat in your mind, release and empty. Release and empty. Release and empty. And you let go of all the birds up to the very last one as you repeat, release and empty. The cage is now empty. There are no birds. Everything is quiet and everything is still. There are no thoughts left in your mind as you repeat the word cleanse, cleanse, cleanse. You cleanse your mind of all thoughts. Your mind is clean, free of all thoughts. You are at zero thought. Zero thought. And then you walk into the lake until the water reaches your knees. And as you look at your knees, you see tiny little ripples and waves in the water. But you wish the water to go completely still. So still that you can see the reflection of your face in the water. And you look at these ripples and you repeat, stillness, stillness, stillness. Keep repeating this word as you make the water go completely still. Stillness. Stillness. The water is now gone completely still. You can see your reflection in it. You can see the reflection of the blue sky and the morning sun. The whole lake is become like a still mirror. You are in pure stillness. And in this stillness you repeat the word silence. 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 Keep repeating this word as you go completely silent from within and from without. Silence. Silence. You are now in complete silence from within. You are in pure stillness. Your mind is clean and free of all thoughts. You are now at the same level as the self. And in the presence of the self, you anchor yourself in the self with the anchor thought, with the words, I am the self. I am the self. I am the self. Keep repeating this word as you anchor yourself in the self. I am the self. I am the self. And as you finish anchoring your thought, the only word in your mind remains the self. The self. The self. Keep repeating that as you become one with the self. The self. The self. The self. You are now fully anchored in the self. And from here on, you will begin to get thoughts, you will begin to realize in your sleep, the next day, through your life, you will begin to realize the self-reality of all the things you experience in your material reality. Even when you go back and look at each experience, you will start to see a much broader dimension until you will be able to do it like second nature, switch from the material reality to the self-reality. Practice this each day before you go to bed. You may open your eyes when you wish. So that was the technique that you can practice to shift yourself from the material reality to the self-reality. When you do it at the end of the day, what you've done is you placed your material mind at a much higher level and you go to sleep. And from there on, whenever you revisit your experiences, when you go into reflection, in that reflective mode, you will begin to see the bigger picture. And at some point, you will begin to experience both your realities. It takes work, it takes discipline, it takes commitment, but this is the way we see the extraordinary in the ordinary. This is the way we see the total reality of everything we are experiencing in our lives, in our beautiful material world, through our blessed material mind, supported, hosted, housed, energized, given life by the self, and you see that reality too. So with that, I'd like to conclude today's insight. We may have overrun a couple of minutes, but I thought it was useful to share this technique with you because it's a great time to start from today.